The tale I am about to tell you is one of a man who wagered everything on his ambitions. The tragic hero is one of the oldest and most prominent character archetypes in fiction. The statement I just read out, preceding the house in Fata Morgana's third door, could be in reference to any number of famous literary tragic heroes. This visual novel in particular is rare for containing two prominent characters who can be described with this label: Morgana, as I discussed in a prior video on this channel, and Jacopo. I've been thinking more and more recently about the underlying meaning of Jacopo's storyline and his ill-fated quest for power and ultimately for redemption. How can we acquiesce the Jacopo we meet in the third door with the Jacopo we come to know in A Requiem for Innocence and Reincarnation? How can these two entities be part and parcel of the same character? How can we begin to understand Jacopo? Though there had been hints of Shakespearean influence in the first two doors of Morgana's story, nowhere is this influence clearer than in the third door and in the character of Jacopo. For those of you unfamiliar with Renaissance tragedy, the third door is heavily inspired by one of Shakespeare's most famous tragedies, Othello. However, the events of the third door differ from Shakespeare's original tragedy in several fascinating ways, which I will highlight, even while the basic plot details remain the same. Othello was a general in the Venetian army, recently married to the daughter of a wealthy nobleman, the beautiful and virtuous Desdemona. This marriage would have drawn little attention had Othello also been of noble birth. Instead, he is a Moor, set apart from Venetian culture and society by his race. In the play, Shakespeare's Othello has drawn the ire of his envious bannerman, Iago, who seeks to hurt Othello by convincing him that his newly wedded wife, Desdemona, is having an affair. The parallels with the events of the third door, by now, should be obvious. But how exactly does Othello differ from Jacopo and from the third door in general? For one, the maid's telling of the story keeps us ignorant of the machinations of Maria, the third door's Iago equivalent, while also making Jacopo seem much less of a victim than Othello was in the original text. In Shakespeare, Iago often breaks the fourth wall and addresses the audience directly. We are fully aware of his schemes and are helpless to prevent Othello's downfall, as he is quickly convinced of Desdemona's guilt and ultimately comes to murder his own wife. In Morgana, the reverse is true. Maria's schemes are initially concealed from the reader, leading us to believe that Jacopo's paranoia and abusive treatment of the white-haired girl are entirely down to his flawed and possibly even evil nature. In the end, Jacopo does not murder his wife, as Othello does, nor does he commit suicide as a result. His fate is arguably even more tragic than in the Shakespearean original. He lives out the rest of his days miserable and alone, forever hoping for the return of his once beloved white-haired girl, and forever without redemption. Rereading The Third Door with knowledge of events later in the visual novel, and fully aware of the relationship between Jacopo and Morgana, is a fascinating experience. A second time round, we can see all of the clues and double meanings in the visual novel's writing. We see the underlying tragedy of Jacopo, a man who wagered everything on his ambition, with heartbreaking clarity. This is a man whose pride, ambition, and fragile male ego, the death of many a tragic hero before him, brings about not only his personal downfall, but also that of the woman he loves most. Jacopo is ultimately defined by his love for Morgana, and indeed the corruption of this love, which we see realized in A Requiem for Innocence. The relationship between a young Morgana and Jacopo may be earnest and heartfelt, but it can also be unsettling to read. Jacopo's love for a girl of only 11 at the time is disturbing in any modern context or understanding of romance. Not even the other characters in the narrative can comprehend Jacopo's fixation with the pious, damaged, and unapproachable Morgana, nor her, or indeed Jacopo himself. It should be noted, however, that this fixation is entirely without a physical element. It is a romantic love undeniably, but platonic nonetheless. And though Jacopo may say that he doesn't understand his own feelings, we, the readers, can look between the lines. The biggest hint as to the nature of Jacopo's feelings is in the title of this prequel, A Requiem for Innocence. I believe that the immediate connection and affinity Jacopo feels with Morgana is because he sees himself and his own life experiences in hers. Jacopo's backstory has more similarities with Morgana's than might be immediately apparent. Though the original Morgana knew her family, something Jacopo never knew, they both experienced the horrors of the world they lived in at a very young age. Morgana's suffering at the hands of Lord Barnier needs no elaboration. Jacopo grew up in the slums, a place riddled with crime and with murder, which Jacopo freely admits to the so-called witch to have been fully complicit in. In one of their most heartfelt moments, he tells her thus, "I'm probably irredeemable in your eyes. I've stolen, lied, deceived, and even killed people." This is a man who has been corrupted by the world around him and lost his innocence. Without the influence of Morgana, he will continue to be corrupted by it, to the point of being scarcely recognizable. Many of these two's intimate character moments specifically emphasize innocence and virtue as a point of connection. When Morgana allows Jacopo to hear her sing, something she permits to no one else, Jacopo describes her song as a thing of beauty. It was pure, he says, untainted by the filthiness of the slums, unobscured by the crudeness of the people who normally sang it. This purity is the innocence he feels he has lost, and that Morgana is in the process of losing herself. As Jacopo finally realizes he's in love with Morgana, he sees a vision of her face without the scars the world has inflicted upon her. It is a vision of Morgana with her innocence intact. Similarly, we can see the source of this love reflected in his desire to, as Jacopo puts it, show Morgana the world. Implicitly, this is not the corrupt and sinful world around them, but rather a different world, one full of virtue, one that could make both of them smile. It is also a world that, in two different lifetimes, neither Morgana nor Jacopo will get to see. In both of these continuities, the original and the third door, Jacopo makes the same mistakes. He allows his pride and ambition to overpower his conscience. The Jacopo of their first life will come to betray Morgana, and the Jacopo of the second will come to betray the white-haired girl, a physical manifestation of the very virtue and innocence within Morgana which he fell in love with. The same repeated mistake, and the same destructive ambition. No analysis of Jacopo's character is complete without discussion of reincarnation. Though this extension serves as an epilogue to the whole game, the relationship between Morgana and Jacopo receives special attention, as this was one of the biggest unresolved questions from the original game. I have already analysed this in terms of forgiveness in my video on that topic, but crucially, this analysis was from Morgana's perspective. Looking at it through Jacopo's eyes, reincarnation is just as heartbreaking and morally ambiguous. The writing places us in Morgana's shoes, asking us, would you forgive Jacopo if he had hurt you in this way? In one of the most moving and astonishingly written scenes in all of Morgana's narrative, these two discuss whether they are beholden to the sins of the past, regardless of whether they were committed in a past life, or even if they have any memory of committing them. Jacopo, unaware it was he who hurt Morgana most, says this: obviously, she didn't need to atone for anything. But what about those who had hurt her? If they were alive now too, would I be able to say the same about them? Was it right to just let them move on? Unwittingly, he questions whether he himself is worthy of redemption. This, I feel, is the underlying meaning of Jacopo's storyline and character arc. To the question of whether he is worthy of redemption, we know Morgana's answer. She cannot remove Jacopo from her life, but neither can she entirely forgive him. Whether we as readers would do the same is for us to decide. It is just another part of understanding Jacopo.